Welcome to the Two Boots Word Vault podcast. This episode is a recording of my evening at the American School of Storytelling, where I told stories and read poems about my predicaments in Mexico and Alaska as a young man. The soul singer David Ballman provided an acapella soul chorus commentary.
And with that, I'm going to say, I'm looking forward to this. The title alone it says to me, what could this possibly mean? And so let us find out. All right.
Thank you. So, Cornbread's coming next week. I already got my ticket. I saw him 20-some years ago down at a little cafe. Actually smaller than this, Star Cafe in Stockholm. I wrote a poem for him. It's been published. I didn't get a hold of Cornbread to ask if I could use his name, so I used a different name in the poem for publication, but I'll recite it with his name. The best blues. Now the best blues come from old men like Cornbread Harris. A bent-over piano man in a tux among bikers. His piano has a linoleum sound, but his sidekick is solid on guitar. I hear moaning through the frayed ends and weeping on the bare ends. His voice is like that Persian rug. The old man pulls the blues from deep in the earth. His licks are twinkling like old sea fossils asleep in a limestone bed. There's no traffic in this river town, so I stand in the middle of the street. The moon is a bone over the road. Tonight, no dogs will sleep. Now the best blues come from old men. Men like Cornbread Harris. His body leans into a crooked song, and there's dust on his road to love. The blues seep out the open screen door of this Rivertown Star Cafe. Cornbread's voice is worn out like that Persian rug. I hear moaning through the frayed ends. I hear weeping through the bare ends. I hear moaning through the frayed ends and weeping through the bare ends.
My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me, what did you sleep last night? Oh, in the pines, when the sun don't ever shine, I was shivering the whole night through. Now she was married to a hard-working man. They lived about a mile from here. They found his head in a driving wheel. His body never was found. Oh, my girl, where will you go? I'll go where the cold wind blows. Yeah, in the pines, where the sun don't ever shine. I was shivering the whole night through. Yeah, in the pines, where the sun don't ever shine. I was shivering the whole night through.
Wow. That's good.
Does that make you an old man? Yeah, the best stuff comes from old men.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, I want to talk about back in the day when I was a young man, a bored young man. And this was a great time of transition for me. I want to read this poem before I get started on the stories. Because this is about an old man, my grandpa. And it's about me. And it's about the path we've taken. And this was a prompt from a cave painting from the Lascaux Caves. There's a cave painting, 2 heads of 2 cows. The title of the poem is On Nicholas Abner Young's Birthday. Give or take a millennium, the paintings are 20,000 years old. The 2 red cows may have been painted centuries apart. We'll never know. At least one cave painter understood how cattle communicate. In this detail, they face each other as if they're angry and checking one another out. One cow has an S-shaped horn. The other has a drooping horn, like the new moon in a late sky. 42 years ago, as a cattle inspector, I saw this every day in feedlots or pastures. Without the time, it's hard to learn if a particular cow dislikes another. At 15, my grandfather fled his father's farm to be a ranch hand at Fort Sisseton. He already understood the emotional life of cattle. I never completed that education. I still envy Gramps' savvy. Today, and I wrote this on his birthday, today he would be 124. The spring after Gramps died, I began inspecting herds for the livestock board. That year, Dad turned 50. Dad had been a meat cutter since he was 13. Cattle were the source for my family's well-being. And like the cave painters, my ancestors studied them. Gramps taught me cowboy songs, and Dad always said grace. This starts when I was a cattle inspector. I was returning from my rounds as a cattle inspector for the state veterinarian. I worked in southern Minnesota. My responsibilities was to make sure that the quarantines of imported cattle were enforced. I had to inspect sale barns, farms, even a Hormel. Once a year, I had to go through the big plants. But most of the time I was driving around, maybe 200 miles a day in a state car. It was late winter. It was evening. And as the snow-covered, dull, flat cornfields rippled past the car as I was driving 65 miles an hour, I turned on the radio. It was WCCO. And in those days, it was the only radio station you could get statewide. And a curious interview was ending. There was a man who said he wanted to help get a maintenance man to a Mexican mission, a handyman that could help them out. Well, I wrote down the phone number that he gave, continued home. When I got home to my small town apartment in Janesville, Minnesota, I called him. Turned out he was a dentist from Coon Rapids, and he didn't know much about the work. didn't know exactly what they needed. He had the information secondhand. But he had an address, so I mailed a letter. Now, I was bored with cattle inspecting. It would have been a great job, a state job, a car, no bosses. My only bosses were 200 miles away. Been a great job if I were 45 or 50 with a family to support, but I was 27 and single. I wanted some adventure. I wrote the letter, sent it off to Mexico. 4 months later, I'm in the Sierra Madre Oriental Mountains in the state of Puebla. When I arrived at the Centro Cultural Totonaco, I found out that it was an evangelical school and clinic. Now, originally, I sent the letter because I had been raised Catholic. Even though I was lapsed, I figured I can go into any Catholic mission and deal with that environment. After 12 years of Catholic school, I'd met a number of missionaries. But I decided to stick around. And I worked as a handyman. I made crude tables for the teachers. I wired a chapel out in the mountains where there was very little electricity. I repaired some infrastructure like the pipes for the well. And once in a while, I got to help the doctors as a nurse. When they did minor surgeries, sometimes they needed my help. And there was one surgery I specifically remember where the young Prussian doctor was removing cataracts from a 100-year-old woman. She was a Totonac Indian. She lived in a thatch hut next to the river. And that 100-year-old woman was flirting with me, inviting me back to her hut. Well, at Thanksgiving that year, a group of doctors came down from California. Doctors, nurses, and dentists. And they were going to have a week-long clinic for the Indians in that part of Mexico. And the Aztec Indians and the Totonac Indians came out of the mountains. They were lined up. Some of them waited in line for 3 days to get free care. I found out that some of them had walked 10, 15 miles. Among the doctors, there was one who was a pediatrician from Ventura, California. He had been at the clinic the year before. He saw the need. He went back to California, and he decided to do something. So he went around to all the clinics in his area, and he found that he could get expired medications and drugs and have them shipped to our clinic. He could get them to Tijuana, smuggle them into Tijuana, but he was going to have trouble shipping them from Tijuana to Veracruz. That was 1,900 miles. But he was a Rotarian, part of the Rotary Club. And he contacted Rotarians all along in Mexico, telling them his story. And he thought, I think we can do this. We can get these medications there. So he demanded that I drive him from our clinic 3 hours to Poza, Rica. Poza Rica. That means the rich well. Poza Rica, a city of 100,000, is the oil capital of Mexico, headquarters of Pemex. Pemex, short for Petroleum Mexico. So I drove him to Poza Rica. He had demanded that I wear a tie. I hadn't put a tie on for 3 years. I had to borrow a tie. And on the drive to Poza Rica, I realized how well-intended and naive this man was. His scheme didn't quite make sense to me. When we got to Poza Rica, of course we got lost. In Poza Rica, there are no street signs and very few street lights. So we arrived late to the Poza Rica Rotary Club. As we walked in, we were led to the main room. Wasn't what I expected. It was a big room. It looked like one of these Minnesota supper clubs out in rural Minnesota. You know, the red fabric walls with the dim lights. You know, waiters in white shirts, black ties, and sharp black trousers. We were led to this main room, and there was one table, a long table. At the head of the table was an enormous man. To his left, there were 3 elderly gentlemen with open shirts. On his right, there were 4 younger men, probably between 35 and 45. And they were all wearing golf shirts. The large man at the head of the table clearly was the jefe. His head was so big, it was about the size of an Angus bull that I had quarantined 5 months earlier back in Minnesota. His shoulders were so big, they were about the size of the car seat of the vehicle that I had turned back into the state fleet. When we introduced ourselves, he started praising us with this flowery flattery in English, telling us how wonderful our project was, how kind we were, how much effort we're putting in. And he welcomed us and he offered us dinner and something to drink. I saw that nobody else had a tie. I loosened my tie. And as the evening went on, I took it all the way off. Because this doctor asked if he could give his spiel while I was eating. And he began, this naive man, well-intended but naive. He spoke no Spanish. The big head man had asked Juan, one of the young men, to translate the English for the rest of the men. The doctor started waving his arms excitedly, laying out his plans to bring drugs and medicines from Tijuana to Poza Rica. How the Rotary clubs could serve all of the people in our area in Puebla. The doctor started his speech. Hola, my frienditos. I shrunk up. You know that feeling I just wanted to sink into myself. As he continued to speak, and Juan is translating, one of the old men started speaking Spanish very quietly. I knew just enough Spanish to know that this old man is telling a joke. And the old men next to him are stiff-lipped. But the young men, they're holding back their laughter and they're shivering and shaking, trying to hold it back. The punchline was that Mexican burros are smarter than North American gringos. And I thought the room was going to explode, but they held it back. The doctor stopped his speech. He said, "Oh, thank you for your excitement. Jesus must be filling you with joy right now." He continued. When he finished his speech, the big man stood, once again, flattered us for our kindness and our desire to help these poor Indians. And he said he would send Juan to our clinic the following Saturday. This was Thanksgiving night, by the way. I just couldn't believe that this was going to happen. The doctor then said, "Oh, wait a minute. I'm leaving tomorrow morning." He's flying back to California the very next day. And he said, "But Tim will be there. And Tim will be the point man for this. So Juan, you meet with Tim." I shriveled a little bit more inside. We left. I shook hands with the jefe, each one of the old men, each one of the young men. The 3-hour drive back to the clinic, it seemed an endless string of "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. We're doing Jesus' work." The next morning, after the doctor left, Heinz, who was our overseer at the clinic, he was a German who had been living in Mexico for 20 years. He was married to a Mexican woman and had Mexican children. He asked me how it went. I told him the story. He said, "Tim, Juan will not come." He said, "They don't want to do this stupid thing." In Mexico, that head man is the head of the Mexican mafia in this part of the country. All of the Rotary clubs in Mexico are connected to the mafia. They don't want to do this stupid thing. And I'm shrinking inside, hoping. And sure enough, Juan never showed up. I was relieved. I didn't want to be working, smuggling drugs and medicine into Mexico with the Pemex oil cartel.
Some fine morning when this life is over, I will fly away to the home upon God's celestial shore. I will fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I will fly away in the morning when I die, hallelujah, by and by I will fly away. When the shadows of this life have grown, I will fly away. Like a bird through prison bars I have flown, I will fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I will fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I will fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I will fly away to the land where joy will never end. I will fly away. Oh, I'll fly away. Oh, glory, I will fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. Fly away.
Wow.
So I flew away. I left my life in Minnesota. I want to read a few poems in between this story and the next story. This is some poems about Mexico and Alaska. The prompt for this poem was a cave painting from Lascaux. Get the imposing figure of a black auroch. And the poem is titled Gringo Go Home. The first time I entered Mexico City's subway, I descended into a tiled subterranean network. Waves of Mozart's music played through the system as I walked, a head taller than the crowd. A river of black hair rippled on the cavernous ramp. My white man's face was like a football bouncing atop the black waves of brown faces of the locals. On Independence Day, revelers threw confetti as fireworks lifted over the Zocalo. Angry young men chucked lime in my face. I was the other. As they fled, they shouted, "Gringo, go home! Gringo, go home!" Was the other a curiosity for Paleolithic painters? In our world with 8 billion people, the other is no mystery. And border walls won't stop the coming waves. The coexistence of sorrow and joy. And this prompt was an Andrew Wyeth painting of Helga. And Helga in this painting is called the Prussian. The young Prussian doctor desperately yearned for relevance. He walked stiffly through the Puebla Mountain Clinic, like a lamppost, on the move, ready to impose his brilliance. He arrived from Hamburg with his willful compassion to heal Indians. His father said his eye-hand dexterity surpassed the average man's. He wanted to try his hand in the wild before returning to civilized Europe. Once, he gently removed a cataract from a Totenach's eye. The woman refused to cry. Her will arrived, but her whimpers were cached in the palm thatch of her smoky Papantla hut. Helga's eye is so real that her texture and lashes could be my mother's. When overwhelmed, Mom retreated to her room, rocked and wept until she could deal with her children and her 9-year-old's death. Grief filled our days at the clinic too, and it buoyed our joy when a child recovered, or when a man who had limped 10 miles on his axe-hacked leg could walk home, eyes up and smiling. Helga is almost smiling. The painting tells you, as do my slides of beautiful Totenach women, that behind her eye is a resistance, a persistence, and the coexistence of sorrow and joy. One more about Mexico. 3 voices in the Olmec silence. The Olmecs were a civilization that predated the Mayans. The 3 voices. The gringo. My people are begging for letters from this jungle, and they reread the 20-year-old postcards I once mailed from Papantla. All they know is a little about coffee, and that there's human hair on the crucifix Jesus, and that the vipers are striped black and red like stockings. The mestizo. What dreams are in the hands of death? My lungs hold a machete and 2 bullets. My father's eye asks an old revenge. His voice is a blade across the bloodstone, and his spittle slops a green-skinned orange. His mustache writhes in hatred toward the Indians, and time slips away, wrapping around the yellow moon. The Totenach. After the tiny whimpers cease, nothing more can add to my sorrow. Not the bean face through the white coffin window, not the breeze through the empty hammock, not my blood that stopped running by the moon. My lips are cut red by my grinding teeth, and now the petals of my tears will never dry. There was a young Totenach woman and her husband who worked at the clinic, and their tiny baby died of whooping cough. In their evangelical culture, the men sat on one side, the women on the other. There was no way to share their grief. As they walked past the little coffin, I could see the little baby through the glass window on the coffin. Also, it was on the Day of the Dead. I was called one of the young men in the town, which was adjacent to the clinic, had been shot and stabbed. Another man drove that man to a hospital 2 hours away in the other direction because it was a gang war between 2 gangs in our little town with just a couple hundred people. Part of my experience in Mexico. The Alaskan poems. Again, the prompt for this poem was a cave painting from Lascaux. The cave painting is called The Monumental Animal Dance. Dark layers of stone form the dance floor where the unicorn, the horses, and cattle come to life. The stone ceiling and its shadows are a yellow and brown version of an aurora borealis light show. Once in Alaska, from a snowbank, I watched the aurora dance overhead. It was March and 20 below zero. I fell upward into rippling veils of green, blue, and pale red. Stars twinkled and happiness filled me. When the Alaskan pipeline was finished, men outnumbered women 4-1 in Fairbanks. Many nights I went to the bar to dance. At the Silver Dollar, every man desired the woman from Newfoundland. At the Howling Dog Saloon, they kept sawdust on the floor. Counterculture refugees danced more loosely than the cowboys and the savvy Newfie, who glided to the steel-stringed guitar and lonesome songs for home. This poem is taken from a painting by Thomas Cole, who was a painter in the American Sublime tradition. This painting was done in 1828. Thomas Cole felt divinity in what he saw and what he painted. A waterfall cools the darkness over a calm lake. The bend of a bare tree magnifies the flight of the high gray clouds. A slice of gold emerges near the picture's center, where a being sits cross-legged and looks over a ridge to the coming day. He's at the umbilicus, where mountains join the sky in the black water. Once in Alaska, above Minto Flats, an old man sat on a canvas chair. I had to pass him to reach my boat. He was praying softly toward dawn and the Yukon River grasses. I nodded and he nodded back. Today, dawn's faint glow sneaks through the shadows of my world, and its beauty is about to spread. My tomatoes are larger than any I've ever grown, and my raspberries are bountiful. And one more poem, again from Thomas Cole's series. This one is called The Course of Empire, the Savage State. That was the painting. The title of the poem is Dangerous Exhilaration. Dangerous exhilaration, says a commentator of Cole's painting. The winds are strong, the hills ripple, and a golden mountain rises from the mists. A man and a wolf are hunters at the chase. Dad's cousin Bill was born and raised and hunted on Dakota's prairie. Whenever he'd visit our cabin in the North Woods, he would flee after 2 days. He told me, I want to die in the wide open spaces. My wife knew a boy who had drowned and was revived after being dead for many minutes. He was never the same. His curiosity about death led him to live only for exhilaration. He hated color. As a man, he bragged that the girls pictured on milk cartons had disappeared because he had killed them. His mother shot him and prevented him from continuing his spree. When I turned a curve on the road in Denali Park, a blonde grizzly was gobbling berries 20 feet from the car. My soul spread into the autumnal colors, into the toothy sky and Denali's white gold snow. A year earlier, in half light below Mexico's cathedral altar. I stared at gray crypts that held the remains of dead bishops. Who wants to end that way? I'd rather be bare shit in the woods. Alaska is an adventure. When I came back from Mexico, I spent a couple weeks back here in the Twin Cities, and my brother flew down from Alaska, and I returned with him. He'd been there for 4 years. I didn't realize when I got to Alaska that the unemployment rate was about 25% because the pipeline had just been completed. The first barrels of oil were about to flow from the North Slope on the Arctic Ocean to the Seward Port down on the Pacific Ocean. But I was fortunate. I was able to find a job right away at the North Pole Police Department. North Pole is a small refinery town about 13 miles southeast of Fairbanks. In that small town, there were 6 of us, 2 dispatchers, I was one of them, 3 policemen, and the police chief. The police chief was my age. In the first 3 months I was there, we had 4 felonious assaults on our police force. We had an African American who was jumped and beaten by 10 racists. The other dispatcher, a woman, and our rookie cop were held hostage by a drunk woman who came into the police department with a 30-06 and held them hostage for 45 minutes. In that small town, our police department building was no bigger than this room. There was the garage, the desk where I sat, and the chief's office right behind. So the woman could easily come through the garage with her rifle. After 45 minutes of negotiations, she threw the rifle over the police car. When it hit the concrete floor, it ejected the shell, which went underneath the police car. So when they took her to jail and charged her, they could only charge her with brandishing a weapon without shells. And as the police chief was trying to find out what she was about, why did she do this, she says, "I want you to arrest my husband." But she wouldn't tell us why to arrest her husband. We found out a few weeks later, after she served 2 weeks in jail for that misdemeanor. She finally told them that her husband had been molesting boys. And they did catch him with a boy. That's what happened, but it's the 4th one. The 4th officer I want to talk about. He was our sergeant. I'll just call him Johnny V. Johnny V had been a homicide detective in a mid-sized Tennessee city. He came to work on the pipeline because the pay was much better working security on the pipeline than it had been working as a homicide detective in Tennessee. And as the work on the pipeline diminished and his services were no longer needed, he moved into North Pole with his wife and his kids and took the job. He was our sergeant, the most experienced man, on our little police force. I was working the afternoon shift, and it was about 6 o'clock. I got a radio call from Johnny. He asking for a welfare check. A welfare check meant that I had to radio back with him every 20 minutes to find out if he was okay. And that was odd. About 10 minutes after that call, Johnny radioed back in. He said, "I've been shot. I'm chasing the shooter down the highway. It's a black man on a motorcycle, and he has a blonde girl behind him shooting at me with a rifle. I'm switching over to the State Patrol radio band." State police from our neck of the woods were tearing down, going southeast. They found Johnny in his car, 50 miles down the highway, found Johnny in the ditch. He had a bullet wound in his shoulder. There was a bullet hole through the windshield. As the ambulance was taking Johnny back to the hospital in Fairbanks, I heard over the radio that the state police had found a black man on a motorcycle with a blonde transgender behind him. They thought they had the culprits. But that pair had a receipt from a gas station 200 miles further. And they were coming towards Fairbanks, not going away. They were not the culprits. A few days later, the chief came in and said, "I have to tell you that Johnny made up the entire story." He says Johnny was bored, and he parked himself at the gravel pit, and he was just playing with his gun and accidentally shot himself. And he was trying to figure out how to get out of this predicament because he was on duty. So he made up the story. Well, weeks later, I found out that the reason that he agreed to tell the truth was that the investigators found the bullet in the crease of his car seat. It had come through the windshield at an angle that there was no way that a bullet coming from down the road would hit and go down. That convinced Johnny, give this confession. Weeks later, I was in court, watched Johnny plead guilty to a number of misdemeanors. His sentence was 3 days in jail and pay for all of the overtime and investigative time. That evening, he went back into jail at 5 minutes to midnight. That was his first day of the 3-day sentence. He was in jail for 24 hours. He was let out of jail at 5 minutes after midnight. His 3 days was 24 hours and 10 minutes. Now Johnny went directly from the county jail in Fairbanks to the airport and headed home to Tennessee. His wife and his children had left a couple weeks earlier. I was working the midnight shift. Just about the time that Johnny's airplane took off from Fairbanks International Airport. It's probably 1:30 in the morning. But the chief came in. asked me if I wanted to take Johnny's position. They had an open slot. Now, I was fed up. I had my fill of law enforcement. I had been a cattle inspector. My title was Law Compliance Officer for the state veterinarian. And as a police dispatcher in that small police department, I had to type up all of the police reports. So I knew every detail of every crime, every sex crime, every drunken, violent, domestic. I had to comfort the victims who came into the police department because it was such a small place. There was no room for them. They had to sit in a chair next to my desk. I had to talk to people on the phone when they called the 911 number. Had to comfort them or bring them down as best I could. So I had my fill. I considered accepting the job for about 10 minutes. Because I already made up my mind I was coming back to Minnesota in September when my sister was arriving. And we were going to tour Alaska and then drive back. Which we did. And in Montana, as we're coming across Montana, I turned the radio on at noon. And you're all old enough to remember Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey's noontime program, The Rest of the Story, was airing that day. And don't you know it? Paul Harvey came on and started telling the story about Johnny V. And he told the whole story about Johnny V being shot by a motorcyclist and being found in the ditch. And in his way, he expanded that story with his loud, stentorian voice. There was a radio commercial. And when he came back, he said, "Now, I will tell you the rest of the story." Proceeded to tell you what I told you. But Paul Harvey, in his arrogance, was talking about Johnny's incompetence and his cowardice. Now, I get to tell you the rest of the story. Remember what I said when Johnny flew out to go back to Tennessee? Later that night, the fire captain, Clayton, who was Johnny's best friend, came in and sat down and asked, "Tim, would you like to know what really happened?" Of course. Johnny was having an affair. And he was in bed with his lover, whose husband had been working on the North Slope and came home a couple days early and put a bullet through Johnny's shoulder. There were never any charges. And I was glad to be heading back home to Minnesota.
Well, it's nobody's fault but mine. Nobody's fault but mine. If I die, my soul will be lost. Well, it ain't nobody's fault but mine. You know my mama, she taught me how to pray. Yeah, my mama, she taught me how to pray. And if I fail to pray, my soul be lost. Well, it ain't nobody's fault but mine. I said it ain't nobody's fault but mine. No, nobody's fault but mine. If I die, my soul be lost. Well, it ain't nobody's fault but mine. You know I got a Bible I can read. Yeah, I got a Bible I can read. And if I fail to read it, my soul be lost. Well, it ain't nobody's fault but mine. I said it ain't nobody's fault but mine. No, nobody's fault but mine. If I die and my soul be lost, it ain't nobody's fault but mine. You know I got a song I can sing. Yeah, I got a song I can sing. And if I fail to sing it, and my soul be low, it ain't nobody, 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 no, 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 nobody, no, nobody's fault but mine. No, 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 nobody's fault but mine. If I die and my soul be lost, say it again. I said, if I die and my soul, I said, if I die and my soul be lost, well, it ain't nobody's fault but mine, mine, mine.
Oh. Thank you, my friend.